Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining in. I know we have folks dialing from different parts of the world. Welcome to another episode of Intentwise webinars. I'm your host today. My name is Sreenath, Reddy. I'm one of the co-founders here at Intentwise. Just a quick note on what Intentwise does. We really offer two solutions. We are an Amazon and retail media advertising optimization platform on one hand. And then on the other hand, we have an Amazon data infrastructure solution, which is really centered around automating all your critical Amazon data and making it really accessible. So those are the two solutions we have. And what all that means is we spend quite a bit of time thinking about Amazon data. Today's topic, we're going to touch on all things Amazon data. We have a script here, but I think we're going to go where the conversation goes. A couple of quick notes on just the logistics for today's webinar. It is an interaction panel style format today, and we will share the recording with you. And by the way, I've shared a couple of links in the chat. One is just to follow the Intentwise company page on LinkedIn, and the other is to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's the place we'll publish this content in a couple of days or so. So keep an eye on that. There will be time for Q&A. This is a topic I'm sure you'll have lots of questions around. Feel free to start posting questions, and then we'll pick those up. Again, the driver behind this webinar is, I think everybody here perhaps are in different phases about thinking about Amazon data, the complexity, how to best leverage it. And I have two awesome folks with me joining me on this topic. And part of the reason why I was really looking forward to this session is they both are doing things in their realms, which is super interesting, and we'll get into that more. I have Scott Kennedy. He heads e-commerce analytics at Wrangling Sports. Scott, you want to go ahead and say hi?
Hello, everybody. I am excited to be here.
Yeah. And then I have Brent Zahradnik. He is the founder of AMZ Pathfinder. It's a global Amazon agency. Brent, go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and happy to be here, Sreenath. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. I joke about Brent because every time I talk to him, I feel like he's in a different country.
I'm just at home today.
So. He's just home today in south of France.
That's right.
And so, Brent, who runs an agency, has a kind of a different constraint, right, when it comes to data, which is a certain amount of data, but across lots and lots of clients, whether it's operational needs or strategic needs. So that's one dimension in which you're going really long. And then Scott, you've got certain brands and you're going really deep and looking at all kinds of data. So you get really two very different perspectives on how you are pushing the envelope or boundaries on Amazon data. And so part of the reason for this webinar is to get you to talk about your real experiences. Let me kick this off by having you just share with us your journeys so far professionally, and especially as it relates to data and Amazon. So, Scott, if you want to go first.
Sure. So I started my career out at Wrangling Sporting Goods, where I was your typical Excel warrior, where I was doing VLOOKUPs on top of VLOOKUPs on top of VLOOKUPs. And I started out by just capturing a lot of CSVs from different systems and plugging them into a Microsoft Access database and then just connecting Excel straight to that. So I can empathize with people who are saying, like, where do I start? Because that's where I started. I then went to Wrangling Sports, and I got the amazing opportunity to stand up a new business intelligence tool for them, which is Power BI. With that, I had to learn a lot about SQL, DAX, Power Query, and then all the soft side things around user enablement and adoption. And as of about a year ago, I got the itch to start looking a little bit deeper at the e-com analytics space. So now I'm thinking about it. I have the business analyst background from Rawlings, but now I'm pairing it with the technical learnings that I've had over the last 5 years, and the fact that I also have teammates on my BI team that I can ask to go call APIs and help build tables for me. So it's all coming full circle, and I think you'll hear a lot of good ideas today in this discussion about just that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. Brent, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I think my background is a lot less technical than Scott's, but it's more of an advertising focus. I did take SQL in university years ago, but have since forgotten most of that and retained only the basics in terms of how it works and what the theory is. Yeah, I started Pathfinder 5 or 6 years ago now, and worked at a B2B agency doing pay-per-click ads on mostly Google and Bing. So have a couple of years of that kind of PPC knowledge under my belt, along with some display advertising. And then kind of saw the trajectory of where Amazon advertising was going, kind of caught that wave, which I credit with a lot of the success of the company, and managed to grow the team to where it is now. And we're working mostly with North American and European companies that are selling on Amazon. And so data has become a necessary thing to plug into the business. I would say that in the early days, I didn't really see that properly. And of course, we had people who had Excel skills way beyond what I can do for formatting reports and making data intelligible and digestible for clients. And in those days, it was mostly downloading things manually from Amazon and putting them together with macros or Excel tools. But now things have evolved substantially from there. And I think since 2018, we've actually been integrating with some kind of database solution for information coming out of Amazon, and that's since matured with our engagement with Intentwise more recently. So we'll be happy to talk about that later on in the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you both for the intros. And obviously, I'm going to try and tap into all your experiences around data. Let's begin by putting some bounds around this term called Amazon data, right? There's lots and lots of data available to you, all kinds, different formats, so on and so forth. But how about we put a frame around it, perhaps talk about broadly speaking, what are the different categories of data that you are dealing with and is important? Scott, if you want to go first.
Sure. So as I mentioned to Sreenath on a prior call, I've actually adopted the Intentwise nomenclature for these different categories of data. So retail operations data is really referring to your portal information, so Seller Central, Vendor Central, as well as potentially the AMS information. And depending on how much money you're spending on DSP, Amazon Marketing Cloud as well. So that's one bundle of information that I think about. The next is the shopper-centric data. So this is all the stuff that an end consumer would actually see on the website as they are shopping around, as well as potentially other hidden HTML objects that you can actually sniff out of the page that the end consumer may not always understand. A good example of that might be like image alt tags or something of that nature that you can scrape out and see. And then the third piece, and potentially a fourth piece to this, is for me, internal data points. So I see everything dealing with Franklin Sports internally, and I think about how to integrate those three things. And then I do think there's this fourth wave of data that's going to hit us as the entire group matures, and that's data related to the tickets that we're filing. So for example, if you have a PDP break over a certain period of time, you need to be able to understand what ASIN broke and from when did it start to when did it get finished. So when you're looking back at your prior year sales, you need to be able to smooth that out and impute some sort of mean or average or predicted model in order to give you insights into, for example, how you might forecast or how you might budget your AMS in the current year.
Awesome. Yeah. So appreciate you kind of piggybacking off of how we define data sets. So shopper-centric data, retail data, internal data sets, and then we'll have to find a name for it. Maybe we can just call it like ticketing as a bucket. But yeah, so makes a lot of sense. Brent, love to hear your angle on this as well, and you're coming at it from a different perspective. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I do agree that the Intentwise breakdown of those two buckets, the shopper centric or retail centric, those two different avenues is quite wise. But I always come to things with an advertising bias. That's just my background. As long as I understand and appreciate that, I'm equipped to proceed. But basically, my first distinction when I think about types of data on Amazon is advertising data, and then what I would call Seller Central or MWS data, and those two things are two separate buckets. Now, another way to see that division, I suppose, could be things that are directly related to ads, like the leading indicators and trailing indicators. So things like impressions, clicks, and spend, and then things like the actual orders and add to carts. And then the things that are metadata signals that surround the ad data. So organic rank and BSR. Those are like two of the big ones I can really think of off the top of my head, and that ultimately have an impact on advertising efficacy. Ideally, every piece of data that we store as an agency, we have to be pretty particular about it because it has to have a business use case behind it. We're not just grabbing everything for the sake of grabbing everything. It has to be, okay, this field is something that influences what we're doing, and so we're going to use it, put it to use somehow intelligently. Something that's helpful or informational for us, and ideally helps our clients. Scott, I like the idea of like internal data too, because as an agency, we're aggregating hundreds of different accounts in different marketplaces. So for us, that actually looks like benchmarking. So what is a normal ACOS for this? What is a normal CPC in this subcategory in this marketplace? So that's the kind of data that is advertising data, but it is internal to us. And we share that very selectively with clients or internally. Maybe in some kind of like promotional stuff sometimes, but that would be maybe that same idea of internal data. I've never thought about that actually until now. So thank you.
No, this is great. And then maybe Brent, we could even peel the layers a little bit on the advertising piece where like we think of it as the quartet, right? So you've got sponsored ads, you've got DSP, you've got Amazon attribution, and then they're making it more and more accessible, but the Amazon Marketing Cloud, which is coming. So there's those pieces also within advertising when we think about data sets. Super helpful. And then I want to piggyback off of this, the way you both describe kind of the different types of data and get into a little bit around data fragmentation, right? So one of the unique things about a channel like Amazon or any marketplace channel is the interconnectedness or interrelated aspect of things. Like and Brent, you mentioned things like organic rank and BSR.
Yeah.
Just as some examples, right? Like inventory position is now impacting your choices of ad spend on the product, or advertising impacts organic rank, and content quality impacts sales. And it's just so intertwined and interconnected. And yet the data itself often, when it comes to you, is fragmented. So what I'm really curious about is get your perspective on, how are you dealing with this data fragmentation? What specific things are you stitching together? Perhaps with some very specific examples would be super helpful for the audience.
Yeah, sure. Scott, you want to go first, or should I shoot first?
Yeah, go ahead. Take it away.
Okay, cool. I would say the interrelated data sets that Amazon does not provide for us and that we have to pull in ourselves using tools like some kind of data store, and then working with a company like Intentwise that can do that, are ultimately the things we're able to tie together and figure out if the inputs we have are leading to desirable outcomes. I guess a good example would be share of voice is a great one. So what is share of voice? It's basically looking at the impression rank and impression share versus competitors in the market for given keywords or given ASINs. So we're trying to track what percentage of market share or market exposure we have versus competitors for these same terms. And that expresses itself in a number of ways. Organic rank is one of those, but what we're trying to figure out correlations between is, well, if we increase spend or if we increase exposure through a variety of campaign types, is our share of voice going to increase? And if so, is that going to lead to better profitability and ultimately like an impact on the bottom line, which means we need to tie in profitability data too, and not just things like organic rank and BSR. So those are like three disparate things that I just mentioned that actually are quite hard to coordinate by themselves. And if we tried to do it without any kind of data store, I honestly can't imagine how we would go about doing it actually. So that's one example. Another one might be what we call like total ACOS in the industry. So, ad spend divided by overall sales. And so that's looking at what I would call like MWS type information and reporting versus advertising information. That's a very simple example, but that's something that a lot of our clients, if not all of them, are thinking about, focused on, is definitely a point of conversation on biweekly or monthly catch-up calls and reporting. So,
yeah, and I think your last example of tacos is a very common one, like bringing organic and advertising data together, and then the added complexity these days is, okay, bring in DSP spend also, not just sponsored ads, and look at the overall impact. So absolutely. Scott, any take on this?
Yes.
I know you.
Yeah. We could probably list out 40 to 50 different specific examples of taking a data element from here and merging it up with somewhere else. I'm actually going to take a bit of the contrarian point of view here and talk about the removing ad spend to predictive out of stock scenarios. Yeah. A lot of SaaS players that you talk with will look at your point of sale data and say when you're running into an out of stock. But if anybody lived through the supply chain crisis that we just went through, it's very possible that your internal supply chain systems were calling out like much more dramatic out of stock scenarios way before your POS data was saying you were gonna be in a tight spot. So I think maybe the most obvious place to say where we would like to integrate data more often is just getting a more holistic view of our 365-day internal supply chain outlook and how we might want to start slowing down our ad pace much sooner than what POS data might be dictating.
Yeah, and then the whole inventory and ads, and Brent, I'm sure you've been through is we have heard it so many times where what happens is like there is this understanding that sponsored ads and sponsored display are inventory aware, meaning that if you're out of stock, you're not serving ads. But what happens is like the product is set up to show up in the future date, and ad starts serving with a label that says coming soon or what have you, and conversion rates tank and ACOS is horrible and so on and so forth. There's just been a lot of questions that have come at us. How do we tie inventory and advertising together? But I think the point you're making, Scott, is like, don't just do it in real time as the issue is happening. You can potentially predict this much earlier. Sure, but exactly. That's kind of the point you're making.
Yeah.
So the things you're doing, right? So I want to just learn a little bit about your current infrastructure. Can you tell the audience, like at a high level, what your data infrastructure looks like today in terms of the stack?
Yeah. First things first, it is not complicated at all. I think that a lot of people get lost in the different ways people talk about data stores. We're just using your standard Microsoft Azure SQL database. It's their cloud database offering. Amazon has its own version. Google has its own version. Point is, we just have a very simple cloud database, and then we're just layering Power BI on top of that, which again is a very cheap, easy to procure tool for the vast majority of people. They even have a free version, honestly, if you want to use that. And that's it. I mean, we're moving past business intelligence and we're starting to think about RPA a little bit. So again, Microsoft, you have a Microsoft Office 365 subscription. I think it's literally like $16 a month for Power Automate to help start actioning and alerting on your data. So it's really not about the technical infrastructure. It's more about like the strategy and why you want to make an investment in grabbing this data because you have some sort of goal that you want to hit with it.
Brent and Scott, I want to come back to the theme kind of you are kind of recommending here, which is take that complexity in our minds out. You can take like small inexpensive steps and make like a great deal of progress around this topic. And we'll touch on that more. Brent, I just I'll let you share kind of what your environment looks like.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you could basically take what Scott said and swap out some of the names of tools, and it's pretty much the same thing. I mean, we use Google Cloud, something he mentioned. We have BigQuery data warehouse store on there, and then that integrates with software called Tableau. We could just as easily use Microsoft Power BI or Google Data Studio or whatever Google's paid solution is called. I can never remember the name of it, but they have one as well. There's a couple out there. As a small business owner, I often encounter problems that I call unsolved problems. Well, I have good news, guys. This is a solved problem. You can go and you can find a database software and a Power BI type tool, and there you go. You're good. So I would say you can hire help and find people who can help you clear away the complexity surrounding this. Because I mean, there is some. Not everyone's a cloud database expert, but yet again, it's a solved problem. I think maybe most importantly for me, shout out to Salam on my team, who is, someone I give a huge amount of credit to for kind of leading and maintaining our database, partnering with Intentwise to get things, set up correctly, all the streams of data flowing in there. And in my opinion, without someone whose job description at some level explicitly kind of contains, their responsibility, their zone of responsibility for this, you're probably not going to find the traction that you're looking for with this unless you have somebody who's responsible for driving it. So from my perspective, that's equally as important as the actual technical infrastructure, which yet again is a solved problem.
Yeah. I think if this should be a headline takeaway, right, for most folks here, which is the tech aspect of it. If it's a hurdle in your mind, come talk to one of us. I couldn't agree more with what Scott and Brent are saying, which is the tech stack is a solved problem. There is a known set of choices. You can't go wrong with any of them. But I do think that the other point that Brent made just now, I think is super critical, which is you can have the tech stack, but if you don't have the commitment of a skilled resource against it, it's not going to go too far, right? So that's also super important. So both of you, Brent, Scott, you know, in one way, yes, it is not complicated, but from another perspective, you made the commitment to invest in this direction, right? You've done that. What I wanted to ask you was, what drove those choices? Is it just operational efficiency? Is it strategy? Is it one of those things where like, you know what, you don't do this, you can't compete effectively? Like, just give us a sense for what has driven those data infrastructure investment choices, even though small, but you made the decisions. What drove those decisions for you?
Sure. I've got two points here. So first of all, when we stood up Power BI a long time ago, we had the mantra speed as a skill. And all of you know that Amazon is constantly offering new opportunities for you to get involved with. Maybe it's Amazon Posts, or maybe it's some new ad type that's available, what have you. We wanted to be able to think about our data and be able to execute upon it very quickly, be the leaders in a lot of these types of opportunities. Because, for example, if you were the first one out of the gate doing like the sponsored brand video ads, we were the first to market up for certain search terms for a good 6 months in our category. Our category is a little slower than CPG, but speed as a skill is one thing that we feel like we really get behind. And then the second thing was data democratization. Once we brought this information in and we put it in front of our product team using our internal item taxonomy, suddenly we flipped all of Vendor Central to be all of the category names that they were familiar with. They didn't have to use Amazon browse nodes or their departments or whatever. We just put it in their own lingo. And suddenly they were able to look at it, and they're just, salivating on Monday morning to come in and look at how their specific division with clicking 0 buttons performed last week and year to date.
Yeah. And that, by the way, again, we'll talk about this later in the conversation. You enrich the underlying data into language that, your existing users can easily consume. And that is an important step which usually comes after your collection of data is in place. But that's a critical point. We'll talk about more Scott later in the conversation. I'm going to do something here, which is I'm going to launch a one-question poll, by the way, just to get a pulse and sense for where things are from a data perspective in your respective companies. Please humor me here. I'm going to launch this thing, and I'll share the results too. So no secret here, but let me do this. I just launched. Hopefully you can see it. And I did make it multiple choice just because, it's like, it's never a single answer when it comes to data. So
yeah, I think as an agency, we would check all.
Yeah, exactly. That's a small percent are saying, hey, we don't store the data, which I think is something you may want to think about and revisit. Excel dominates, not a surprise. Google Sheet pretty high. I'm going to share the results in a moment. I think everyone's done. There's still a few more votes coming in.
Scott, what was that mantra you had? Speed as a skill. I really like that. I'm going to steal that one, I think.
Yeah. We got it from some other Power BI agency that was helping us a long time ago, and we didn't sign them, but that that mantra stuck with me, so I appreciate it.
All right, I think we are done. Let me share end poll, and I get to share results. I think you all see it, right? I'm sharing the poll results. Are you able to see it?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, so it looks like a good number are using databases, which is a good sign. I would just recommend the ones at the bottom of that, like we don't store data, to perhaps move up into one of those three things as step one. Let me stop sharing. There is a request from an audience member asking me to pull up the previous slide. Tony, if it's okay with you, I'm happy to share the slides after the webinar. So I hope that works. Let's see. Cool. Well, thanks for engaging in that poll. Now, the data business, there's parts of it that are unsexy, right? Like data problems, data doesn't show up on time, data accuracy. Brent and my team have had some conversations around this. So let's talk about the challenges, common challenges or pitfalls you have run into, and what are you doing about those going forward?
Sure. So I have some thoughts on this topic. Whenever I stood up Power BI, at first I was just building finished reports. Over time, I realized that I had a lot of different end user types. There were some people who wanted to go into a finished report and just look at it. Some people wanted to go in and be able to download a matrix. Now what I'm finding is some people want me to build them a data model for them to do drag and drop ad hoc analysis over. And then finally, I'm reaching a whole nother group of people where they just want notifications when things that they need change. We got to this point where we were talking with some of our internal consumers, and they were like, hey, I don't want to have to scan this entire report every day just to find an issue on like Thursday randomly. Just you tell me when I need to go into this report. So working through those different end users and properly giving them the tools they need that fit their work style. And for all the Excel people out there, Power BI does actually connect into Excel as well. So you don't even technically need to have like the actual DAX and Power Query building capabilities. You can stream that into a pivot table in Excel. So yeah, that's actually a whole nother user that we also cater to as well.
Wow. I'll give a three-part answer actually, and I want to go back to the investment question too, Sreenath, because I wanted to give some detail on that. But I will say for the people in the poll who answered, they're not using anything to store the data. Even if you are using Excel or Google Sheets, there's a chance you can ingest that same data into your database later. We've actually done this with different data that we've tracked over the years, and we were able to get it into our database, even though we had to retrieve it and pull it from previous things. So just keep that in mind too. It's not like your start date is whenever the day you set it up, looking back for the past 2 months, which is what it usually is for Amazon ad data. Anyway, the challenges at the agency side, I can say building a data culture has actually been a challenge. So this is like let's say a culture or team building type thing, which is not a data challenge, but it is a challenge to, when there's a question getting knocked around the company, have people's mind frame be, can this be solved by the data that we've aggregated and we're diligently storing? Can we piece this together from the different tables that we have set up and different data sources that are provided? So getting people's minds to that place is one of the challenges. And I think getting a grip on the data that's not easily provided by APIs and maybe has to be like scraped or scoped out from other things. Like Scott, you mentioned there are things that can be pulled from like the HTML of the page, which are not necessarily found in an API or easily rendered. That's also been a challenge too, to organize that and tie it into the things that are in the API. Another thing Sreenath alluded to is some of the data quality issues. This usually comes from Amazon. This is usually not a service provider problem. But yeah, Amazon will have a hiccup and then they'll sometimes let you know about it. They sometimes won't let you know about it. And then you have to figure out on this business critical data that we're using to report to clients or make decisions, is everything that's here, can it all be trusted? And so sometimes we run into that, and that's a bit of like a headache-inducing moment, but that's usually from the source itself. That is to say, Amazon. Something goes wrong there.
Yeah, and I will chime in with kind of a service provider perspective around data and data challenges, right? So, Amazon, of course, is making more and more data accessible through APIs. Now, integrating with APIs, it requires a certain amount of dev work, but the integration by itself is not the complex part. What happens after is the complexity, which is, data doesn't come through one day or data is not complete another day. You really have to have infrastructure that can detect those types of issues and perhaps do things to fix automatically before, let's say, someone like Brent even finds out, right? So our hard problem as we build our product is not in the API integrations. Those are okay. We have done many of those. My engineering team has done many of those. But the hard problem is actually data quality and data accuracy and notifying people when something is wrong. So that's certainly been one challenge. I would add that the other thing that happens, because we are in this rapidly what I call shape-shifting environment called Amazon and other marketplaces, right? Metrics change, new metrics show up. Like there's a lot of change constantly, right? The way revenue gets reported in certain campaign types suddenly changes. So things like that happen, and that's kind of table stakes. And you just need to have a process and people that that can deal with that change. Change is a constant. So those are kind of the two things we grapple with all the time, when it comes to kind of data-oriented challenges.
Yeah, I give a specific example for that second one, Sreenath, which is the revenue being reported for VCPM campaigns for sponsored display, which shows up differently in the ad console interface versus the API versus our data. So it's like we have to wrap our heads around that. Yep. So that's a challenge at Amazon. Throws a nice curveball at us there. Yeah,
and in that bucket of console and what you see in the UI versus API, there are some differences, and there are representations that are slightly different. So you need to kind of translate. So there is that issue as well. But hey, we are in business for that reason. But anyway, the point is so those are some of the challenges we grapple with as solution providers.
Got it. Hey, can I rewind a sec to the investment one? I want
to yeah. Sorry. Yes.
So just to go back, I mean, just briefly, like for us on the agency side, giving our perspective as best I can, having client data for both specific accounts for our clients and an aggregate is, I see, a competitive advantage, right? So this moves us more into the so-called like tech-enabled agency. And we are able to add more value as a middleman between the businesses on Amazon and the ad platform itself. Because ultimately, as an agency, if we're not adding some value as a middleman between those two things, we have no reason for existing. So we need to have data that allows us to add more value there. And what do I mean by that? Like better insights, much better, more useful, faster reporting, just context, historical data. If a client says, what happened last year at this time? Well, we actually have that. We can go look that up and we can do a comparison for you, no problem. And they don't have to worry about doing that. So that is why I think, as a thesis for investing in it, that's basically the premise.
Yeah, and I assume that thesis is valid from an agency perspective for you in like all stages of that customer journey, from prospects to surfacing them to long-term retention. So that perhaps plays a part in all of those phases for you. We talked about Amazon and Amazon APIs and stuff like that. For the longest time, I think there's always been this concern around that Amazon's data not being accessible to you. But then over the last quarter, I feel like there's been an inflection point. Like there's so much more data being shared, like for example, mobile sessions, and there's other issues with it right now, but like there's just more and more data being shared. And certainly from an API perspective, their release on March 23rd, where they opened up business reports as well as vendor central data through API. I mean, that's a big change, right? What is your perspective on that? Like, do you see it the same way, and do you expect more and more data to become accessible? I'm just curious. Love your take on that.
Sure. So once you come to grips with the fact that Amazon is not a retailer, they're a platform, then all of this starts to make a lot more sense. Once they are able to have APIs control every component of it, they will allow their customers, the brands, to start operating more like it's a platform instead of a retailer. We've already seen, if you talk to an Amazon vendor manager 10 years ago versus what an Amazon vendor manager can do today, is very, very, very different. A lot of times the resolution to your problem involves you going in and doing something about it inside of Vendor Central or Seller Central. So I get why there might be exceptions to this. There's still obviously value in having connections there for their own particular reasons. But overall, as more and more and more data becomes available, specifically on the Vendor Central side, I think you're going to see a bit of a tipping of the scales back to the 1P world, because they're now going to be able to invest like tomorrow in software solutions and things that have been widely available on the third-party side for a very, very long time.
Scott, I just saw a comment from the audience. Looks like you've got a former Amazon account manager in the audience agreeing with your sentiment. So, yeah, Brent, your take on this?
Yeah, I'm just checking out the comments now. Yeah, on the advertising side, from the agency perspective, yet again, it's like for years we've begged, pleaded, screamed, and yelled at Amazon, and it often feels like talking to a brick wall. We need more data on I don't know, search term volume, on keyword rank, on all these things. And so anything at all that they give us that's opened up, whether it's a new thing in Ad Console, like the search query dashboard, or information on like, let's say, search term impression rank, impression share, bid averages, any of that stuff is welcome. And I look forward to more of it. I really am very positive on it. And, from an agency, I don't think it costs us anything more. It's something that comes through the APIs. We integrate with it. It comes through Seller Central, Ad Console. We download those reports and digest and examine. So I'm bullish on it. Yeah. Keep it coming.
Yeah. And then just from where we see, like, there's lots of new APIs, right? Like hourly data API. There's, of course, Amazon Marketing Cloud, and we're going to see more and more and more of it. I think the ball falls right back into our courts, trying to figure out like, okay, how do we make the most out of all of this data? So, excited about the trend. So we'll see where it goes. Quick note to the audience: if you have questions, just make sure you post them in the Q&A section. And I see a bunch coming up. And we're going to switch to Q&A mode in just like in a couple of minutes here, but just make sure you post your questions in the Q&A section. Thank you. Let's switch gears and talk about kind of guidance and for people, right? So if I'm someone that's just getting started thinking about data infrastructure, you kind of said this a little bit earlier, but like, what would be your 1, 2, 3 pieces of advice if I'm just getting started?
So I would say about 6 or 7 years ago, when I was interested in, I'll be completely honest, probably before that, I thought to myself, like, I'm a technical person. Why would I ever deal with the marketplaces side of the business? I should be learning Adobe Analytics and Google Analytics like right now, and Tag Manager, and because that's where analytics people are today. But then slowly over time, I saw the trend start to change of data becoming available out of Amazon. So a long time ago, you probably had to go find somebody like a Mozinda or an import.io, and you had to go work with them and tell them how you wanted to scrape and pray that it was correct. Now you've got rinse and repeat templated options like Intentwise or other folks that can tell you what you actually need to scrape. And if you have a cloud database, they already probably have a really good process to drop that data off for you. Or there's likely options that'll even host the database for you, and you don't even need to do anything but the Power BI element of the situation. So I would say find a partner who can guide you on where to get your first look at the information in a database format. Use a free version of a business intelligence tool or Excel to tap into that extremely cheap data model and just start looking at the information with a hypothesis on what you're attempting to do, and challenge yourself by looking at the information that way at first before you try and boil the ocean.
Brent?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Scott, if we're looking back 6, 7 years, there's so many things I would tell my younger self, but let's keep it to the data topic for now. Basically, it's not nearly as intimidating, expensive, or difficult as you might think. So even if you have, let's take the shoes of like a Amazon 3P seller, which is mostly the world that I play in, and the people I talk to on a weekly, sometimes daily basis. The amount of data volume that you have and the storage costs associated with that, even if you're the one getting your own cloud server, are minimal. But over the long term, they're going to pay such huge dividends. So my recommendation would be set up that data platform as early as you can, start storing things. Even if you don't even know exactly what you're going to do with it, you will figure it out. And as Scott says, there's free solutions out there you can use to get started. Alternatively, you can jump on YouTube or take courses. I know Tableau even like sells a monthly course is like $10, $15 a month. You can learn from them directly. You can have someone on your team learn from them directly. You can hire for that skill on your team and start drawing conclusions from it and testing hypotheses like Scott said, which is a great way to approach it. Come into it trying to prove or disprove something, I guess, instead of just wandering around. Although that could be nice too.
Yes.
But if you have someone on your team or yourself that can really make the data sing, start capturing it now and then sort out how to actually make sense of it later, I think.
Yeah. Now, great perspective. I will just add that, end of the day, Amazon marketplaces in part are data businesses, right? So very simply put, like, you should own your data. Don't let your data, be sitting on some third-party platform somewhere, and when your service relationship with them stops, the data is gone. Don't do that. Just start owning your data. It is cheap and it is inexpensive. I would start focusing on that now. Even for those people that have committed to a database and infrastructure, are you owning your data? Is a question you should ask, and make sure the answer is yes very soon. All right. That's kind of one piece of advice I would add to what Brent and Scott already said. Brent, you were talking about team skills, and that's my segue into that next question. If you were to think about training your team, or for you personally, Scott and Brent, like, what would be the data skills you would prioritize or recommend?
So the simple order of this is SQL, SQL, and some more SQL. In all seriousness, when we hire people into our division, we already have the quote unquote like strategy layer. And then as the business grew, we had to hire more people. So let's say you've got a couple people working in a particular function like sales ops. What we're attempting to do is take that junior person and get them more technical so that we have like a 1-2 punch of somebody who understands the strategy of what you should be doing, and then the person who helps those strategies come to life. And having those SQL skills embedded in the various functions, whether it's SEO, PPC, sales ops, forecasting, they're actually able to innovate at twice the speed that if it was just me going, function to function, because I have to look at what the big picture of all the projects are and determine where I want to place my bets personally. But so then I can't do the other 3 or 4 things. Whereas if I deprioritize a project, but they actually have somebody who can build an MVP and get something stood up, they're already, even if their SQL was awful, they've done a really good job of scoping out the problem at that point. So by the time I get around to it, I can help them formalize it and model it in an efficient manner.
Brent, would you add anything to that list?
Oh, I don't know. That's Scott's perspective is like so deep and profound. I just am like sitting here thinking, wow, I'm not even sure I follow some of that, but that's really good. I mean, I would say as someone who's not particularly good at this myself, statistics, if someone has a background in statistics, yep. And something I'll borrow from you, Sreenath, you mentioned recently is linear regression, right? So understanding the basics of some of these things, which is, not calculus, not like the hardest math in the world. You can take courses on this online. You can attend a university class. Like there's ways to educate yourself about these things. And then that helps you understand and see through the matrix a little bit. From our end on the agency side, though, I would also say this person has to have a pretty solid education on ad metrics and what they mean, because it's only so much they can do if they don't really understand, well, what does it mean if their click-through rate is good or bad, and what is high or low, and same thing with like ACOS. So that's like basic, but we put everyone through that kind of boot camp. Yeah,
totally. And honestly, we talked about SQL. Just a little bit of context or flavor on SQL, right, is when you build dashboards, inherently dashboards are designed to answer a question you already have, right? And there's a purpose for it, there's a use for it, and that's great. But when you have a new question where new sets of data have to be brought together, you just don't want to have an internal process where you have to wait for months to get that data, right? And that is where, this point Scott is making, I couldn't agree more, and I'm a huge champion of that, is like SQL skill, which, by the way, you don't have to spend 6 months learning a course. No, believe it or not, it wasn't even a setup. I was going to share a link here that is, we're going to do a SQL 101 session. And the way Scott put it, it's like a perfect setup. But I'm going to share a link here if you want to sign up for it. It's simple SQL 101 for anybody that's interested. I just shared a link in the chat. We're figuring out date and time, but we fundamentally believe how important it is. And the thing about these types of skills is you may not have to be a doer, but just going through a little bit of a training gives you what I call like data empathy. You start to understand like who you want to work with, who you want to hire, what type of asks should you have, what is possible. It just a new realm opens up, even if you're not the doer, right? So yes, totally SQL. And for those of you that want to learn more, just go ahead and sign up. I pasted a link in the chat. And then the comment about linear regression, Brent, you and I had talked about it in the past. It's crazy how much everyone is bombarded by AI and machine learning. There's no software that doesn't claim to have machine learning and AI. And yet, do we actually understand what it is, right? So, and a simple exercise of going through, let's say, a linear regression, for example, right? You could do it using Excel. There's YouTube videos. What it does is, again, it opens up our eyes to the idea of how machine learning algorithms really work, which is I'm going to look at 20 different attributes and factors, and I'm going to tease out how all these factors influence an outcome, right? So that's why I was suggesting that it's good for someone to go through 3 hours of let's say linear regression, just to start to get a mental model around how machine learning algorithms work. So that was kind of the premise. But yeah, Excel, SQL, linear regression seem like good ones. And in my mind, I just had one more thing. If you're getting to a place where you're doing a ton of experiments, understanding how to detect statistical significance. Again, just Google statistical significance. You can read up about it or watch a video, YouTube video. I would just add that to the list as well, from my perspective. Guys, this is, I mean, clearly we can keep talking for hours, but this has been kind of super helpful. I actually want to save some time for the audience to ask some questions here. There's already a few questions. But yeah, so if you don't mind, Brent, Scott, I'll just fire away some of these at you. And then the audience, just feel free to post questions in the Q&A channel. First question, in reference to speed as a skill, how quickly do you invest time into any new data that becomes available? Question from David.
So like, I think the way that I tend to think about it is how would I actually use the information? The key point here is if you're using a data provider to go get that information, the incremental cost to go start grabbing it for a 3 to 6 month period is hardly anything. The cost to hold on to that data is hardly anything. So when I see new opportunities to bring in new information, I tend to pull the trigger very quickly because it's really a fluid situation. And again, since our team all has different pieces of SQL backgrounds, we can typically model out and see if there's any justification for going deeper in a particular data element. So maybe we start it by grabbing a piece of data on the monthly level or the weekly level, and then we realize, okay, there's actually more juice we can squeeze out of this by getting daily level data, and the cost is nothing. The cost really boils down to the employee's salary. It's not like the technical piece here the software piece here that's going to be expensive at this point. Mm-hmm. It's really the investment that you're going to make in your own skill set that's going to be the big time suck for a while until you get good at it. But that's how we think about grabbing new data and trying to act on it.
Brent, I've got an agency-oriented question that perhaps it would be great if you could take a crack at it.
Okay.
At what scale does kind of focus on data and infrastructure become important? Like as a growing agency, is it always is there a trigger point or an inflection point where this becomes super important?
That's a great question. I think if you're maybe let's say like a solopreneur operating as an agency, it probably depends on the velocity of spend and the quantity of ad spend that you're generating or you're burning through, because then that is going to dictate what your storage needs could be. Like I think you could probably get away, managing a handful of clients and not really need any kind of data store. But yet again, this question we had earlier about like looking back, if I was to do anything different, I would have set that up far earlier, because as Scott says, the cost of storage, the cost of acquiring it is pretty much negligible.
Yeah.
And this whole like software is eating the world thing that has been happening the past 15, 20 years, right?
Yeah.
As the cost of storage and the databases and stuff like that decreases, the cost of doing it is only your time, energy, effort, and competency. So I'm not really sure if I have a solid answer for that. Like, do it at $50,000, a month or something. But I would encourage you if whoever's asking this question, if you're a solopreneur or a small agency owner, to start looking into that as soon as you can. Pretty much, I don't really see any reason why not to. Especially because for us, one of the use cases is greatly accelerated reporting. So we're able to turn around and make far more visually appealing and more interesting reports. Thanks to the data that we have. And it requires a lot less, man-woman hours, as it were, on our reporting team to generate those things. And they're far more flexible too. So that alone is like a huge reason to do it.
Yeah, interestingly, Brent, like the anecdotal number I keep hearing is like agencies, 20-30% of their time goes into kind of reporting and getting stuff together.
Yeah, it's far less for us. Yeah.
Exactly. So especially if you don't have that infrastructure. So that's perhaps the angle.
And I've been there too as an individual working in an agency. Like 40% of my time is spent making reports. And what you should be doing, ideally, this is part of my thesis, is like you should be the one driving results and understanding the bigger picture for clients and doing things that are unique to you as a human, not things that can be done ultimately by software if it's set up correctly.
Yeah, totally. I'm going to take one question here, and then we are out of time. But I do want to share the contact information of these two gentlemen here, just in case you want to reach out. Let me share my screen with that while I answer this question. There's a question about vendor central data and what APIs are available. The seller partner API is what you want to get, and the especially with the latest release, a number of reports from Vendor Central are now available through the API. But yeah, so seller partner API is what you're looking for. And by the way, the rest of the questions, which we may not have the time to answer, we'll make sure that some response gets back to you. But because we are out of time at this point, yeah, and Brent, Scott, any parting remarks? I think this is a wrap, but I'll let you chime in if you have any final comments. And then, like I mentioned, everybody, we will share the recording with you in a couple of days.
I think we covered pretty much everything. The only parting thought I would say, because I know a lot of people like to zone in on the AMS side of things here, is there's a visual that I saw on LinkedIn where somebody put together a flow chart of why your ACoS may go up or down. And if I see that from the brand side and I ask my agency, why did that happen? I don't want them to actually talk about like the specific ASINs or campaigns that started having a really high ACoS. I want them to add context. And in order to add context, you need to be grabbing some of these other data points about your organic rank changing, a price change, a competitor's price change. I mean, there's almost an unlimited amount of things that you can bring to the table to help people contextualize why a number is going up or down.
Yeah, Brent, any parting comments that you want to share?
Yeah, sure. The last thing I'll say is, like, looking forward, we've integrated a lot of data that, because usually we have a use case for something and then we try to figure out how to integrate it. Now, it's not the other way around, although, there's some things that come up and it's obvious we should do it. But one thing we're really hoping to nail down this quarter, if possible, is to have live dashboards for clients. It's been a dream of mine. So, customizable live dashboards that they can visit, and the data is updated, let's say within 48-ish hours, because obviously Amazon has a lag. But that's something I'm really stoked on, and I'm driving hard towards internally to make it a reality. I've dreamt about that since like 2017 from the agency perspective, but finally I think it's coming to fruition, and it's all thanks to this data integration and these great tools that exist out there like Tableau and Power BI. So just stoked on that.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. This has been phenomenal. I learned quite a bit through the process. Again, I shared the information. Feel free to reach out to Brent, Scott, or myself if you have any further questions. We will try to get a response back to each of your questions if you haven't taken them here. And again, we will share the recording out. Just follow us either on YouTube or LinkedIn, and certainly sign up for that SQL training if you're interested. But other than that, I think we'll call this a wrap. Thank you so much. And thanks for tuning in.